Imagine you are an enslaved worker in, well, basically the most powerful, heavily militarized empire on Earth.
Right.
You've spent your entire life crushing grain, hauling stone, and just watching your people be systematically broken by this regime that claims absolute divine authority.
Yeah, it's a brutal reality.
And then one day, you get told that tonight the empire is going to fall. Tonight, you're walking out as a free person.
Just like that.
Exactly. But you aren't handed a sword. You aren't handed a shield or a map or even some strategic battle plan.
No, you're handed a lamb.
Right. You're handed a lamb, and you are told to slaughter it, paint your doorway with its blood, and eat this hastily prepared meal in your boots, staff in hand, basically ready to run.
Which honestly makes no sense to a modern mind.
To a modern mind, it sounds like absolute madness. I mean, the logistics are just absurd. But according to our sources today, it is precisely this event, this incredibly specific, visceral set of instructions that establishes the exact logic holding the entire universe together.
Yeah, it is the ultimate paradigm shift. I mean, we naturally expect liberation to come through power, right? Through military conquest or maybe some gradual moral evolution over time.
Like a slow societal awakening.
Exactly. We expect a manual on how to be better people so we can eventually earn our freedom. But instead, the ancient world just hands us an altar.
Wow.
And we are forced to confront a completely different architecture of reality.
Welcome to this deep dive. Today, we've tailored this exploration entirely for you, the listener. We've taken a stack of really fascinating sources, specifically this massive, comprehensive theological paper by Chris R. Velazquez.
It's titled The Passover Lamb, Salvation Comes Through Substitution.
Yeah, that's the one. And we're pairing that with a series of incredibly detailed, historically rich infographic charts. And we are just going to dissect them today.
A lot of ground to cover.
It is. Our mission today is to understand one of the deepest, most profound concepts in biblical history, which is the logic of redemption. We're going to explore how that bizarre ancient ritual in Egypt isn't just some dusty historical footnote. It's not a primitive myth.
Not at all.
According to the sources, it is the central, unbreakable thread holding the entire biblical narrative together, literally stretching from the dawn of creation to the end of time. Okay, let's unpack this. How can a perfectly holy, uncompromisingly just God dwell among a deeply flawed, sinful people without instantly consuming them in judgment?
I mean, that question right there is the central animating problem of the entire biblical text.
It really is.
It is the core tension of all human existence. And the answer to this problem, according to Velazquez and the historical data we are looking at today, isn't moral improvement.
Right.
It isn't religious performance where you just try to outweigh your bad deeds with your good ones. And it certainly isn't just ignoring the issue and hoping a transcendent God will, grade on a curve.
Like, oh, they tried their best.
Right. Exactly. The answer is substitution. One innocent life given so that another guilty life can be spared.
That's heavy.
It is incredibly heavy. And to really grasp the gravity of this, I want you to imagine your surroundings fading away right now.
Right.
Imagine the backdrop shifting to this dimly lit ancient Egyptian stone room.
Okay, I can picture that.
You can smell dust and roasting meat. There is this faint, flickering firelight casting long shadows on the walls.
Setting the scene.
Yeah, and outside, there is a palpable, terrifying silence, just waiting to be broken. That is the atmosphere, the profound gravity that we really need to inhabit to truly understand the night of the Passover.
I really love that visual because before we can even begin to understand the mechanics of the Passover lamb itself, our sources insist that we step back and look at the sheer scale of the conflict leading up to it.
The context is everything.
Totally. This wasn't just a physical rescue mission to extract a group of enslaved laborers out of the Nile Delta. The source material frames this as a cosmic showdown. I mean, this was literally a war of the gods.
It's exactly right. And this is where modern readers usually get completely tripped up. The 10 plagues in the book of Exodus are often taught, or maybe just misunderstood entirely, as a series of random ecological disasters.
Like severe climate change or something.
Right. A really bad string of luck with weather patterns and agricultural pests that just happened to coincide with Moses making demands.
Yeah.
But the source material, specifically these historical charts we're analyzing, they explicitly map out how each plague was a highly targeted precision strike against a specific Egyptian deity.
It's like a hit list.
It really is. You have to understand the Egyptian worldview. They believed in Ma'at, which was this concept of divine order, balance, and harmony. maintained by the pantheon of gods and enforced by Pharaoh.
Okay, so a very structured cosmos.
Very structured. The plagues were the systematic theological dismantling of that entire belief system. The God of the Israelites was basically unmaking Mott to prove a point.
Let's actually walk through this takedown list, because when you stop looking at it as a list of spooky magic tricks and start seeing the underlying strategy, it is staggering.
It's brilliant.
It really is. So it begins with the Nile River turning to blood. And it's important to ask, why water? Like, why start there?
Well, you start with the Nile because the Nile was the absolute lifeblood of Egypt. I mean, in an arid desert environment, the inundation, that annual flooding of the Nile, was the sole reason Egypt was a superpower.
Right, it brought the fertile silt that grew all their crops.
Exactly. And so they worshipped Hapi, the god of the annual flooding of the Nile, by turning that life-giving water into blood, which is a symbol of death and contamination. It was a direct defeat of Hapi.
Oh, wow.
It was a demonstration that only the Lord controls the true waters of life. Hapi was exposed as completely powerless to protect his own domain. The source of their supreme confidence was weaponized against them overnight.
That's incredible. And then out of that rotting river come the frogs, just millions of them. It sounds almost comical to a modern listener, right? Like a nuisance rather than a divine strike.
Sure, it sounds like a weird prank.
Yeah.
But the cultural context changes everything. This was a direct, targeted strike against Hecate, the frog-headed goddess of fertility, water, and childbirth.
Frog-headed goddess.
Yes, the Egyptians actually worshipped her for bringing life. Frogs multiplying after the Nile flood were seen as a huge sign of her blessing.
I see.
So what God does here is take their idol and basically give them exactly what they worship, but in such horrific overabundance that it becomes a curse.
Be careful what you wish for.
Literally. The Lord overwhelms them with frogs to the point where they are in their beds, their ovens, their kneading bowls, and then they all die,
Oh, gross.
leaving heaps of rotting, stinking carcasses across the entire land. It proved that true fertility and life do not reside in Egypt's gods. The very symbol of Egyptian life became a source of decay.
This escalation is fascinating. We move from the water to the amphibians, and next, the attack moves to the ground itself. The dust of the earth turns into gnats or lice, depending on the translation.
Which is a precise strike aimed at Yeb, the god of the earth.
Yeah.
The Egyptians prided themselves on the sacredness of their land.
All right.
The message here is profound. Even the microscopic dust of the ground, the very foundation upon which the Egyptian empire is built, obeys the Lord, not Geb.
So Geb is powerless too.
Totally. Geb cannot stop the soil of Egypt from rising up to torment his own worshippers.
Next are the swarms of flies. And again, this isn't just an annoyance, it's an assault on their concept of holiness, isn't it?
Yeah, this targeted Khepri. He was the sacred beetle god, often depicted with the head of a scarab fly or beetle, and was associated with creation, resurrection, and the movement of the sun.
The scarab, yeah, you see that in all the ancient Egyptian art.
Everywhere. And the swarming, biting insects showed that what Egypt considered holy, protective, and divine was actually unclean and a source of absolute torment when commanded by the true God. The gods of Egypt were turning on the people of Egypt.
Then the attack shifts to their economy and their sustenance. A plague strikes the livestock. The horses, donkeys, camels, and cattle all just die in the fields.
This was a devastating, multi-layered blow. The primary target was Hathor, the cow goddess, who was this maternal figure, a protector, and a symbol of love and beauty.
Okay.
Furthermore, they had the Apis bull, which was worshipped as a living manifestation of the god Ptah.
So by wiping out the livestock,
God proved that the life of animals, the foundation of their agricultural wealth and religious iconography, is sustained only by him. The Egyptian gods couldn't even keep their own sacred animals breathing.
after the economy falls, the physical bodies of the Egyptians are attacked. Boils break out on the people and the remaining animals.
Right, defeating Sekhmet, the lioness goddess of healing, medicine, and disease. And the irony here is incredibly rich. Well, the Egyptian priests and magicians, who were heavily devoted to ritual purity and to Sekhmet for healing, they couldn't even stand before Moses to oppose him because they were covered in weeping sores themselves.
Oh, man. So they were physically incapable of performing their duties.
Exactly. The medical and religious elite were rendered unclean and helpless. It showed incontrovertibly that health, sickness, and the integrity of the human body are entirely in God's hands.
Then the theater of war moves upward, the weather turns completely apocalyptic, massive hail mixed with fire rains down.
Striking down Nut, the sky goddess. In Egyptian cosmology, Nut arched over the earth, acting as a protective canopy to keep the forces of chaos at bay.
But she couldn't stop the storm.
No, the Lord proved that the atmosphere, the weather, the very sky itself answers to him alone. Nut's canopy was completely shattered.
Followed by locusts that devour whatever the hail left behind. Just total agricultural collapse.
Defeating Serapis, the protector of crops. Egypt was the breadbasket of the ancient world. They were immensely proud of their agricultural independence.
Right, they exported food everywhere.
Yeah. So this plague showed that regardless of human engineering or the favor of agricultural deities, only the Lord truly provides or takes away food. He controls the harvest.
And then the ninth plague. A darkness that the text says could be felt, descending over the entire land for 3 days. To us, darkness just means the power went out.
Right. Time to light a candle.
Yeah. But to an ancient Egyptian, this had to be literal psychological torture.
It was the ultimate theological terror. This defeated Ra, the sun god, the chief deity, the absolute pinnacle of the Egyptian pantheon.
He was the big one.
The biggest. The sun was the source of all life and order. For 3 days, Ra was blotted out. The empire was plunged into total suffocating darkness. By doing this, God declared that he is the true and only light, and Ra is nothing but a localized myth. It was the complete unmaking of their cosmos.
Looking at this progression, it's like a master hacker dismantling a massive tech monopoly's entire cybersecurity infrastructure.
That's a great way to put it.
System by system, firewall by firewall, just to prove absolute supremacy. They don't just crash the servers. They systematically log in and shut down every single proprietary software the monopoly prides itself on, proving that the original architects have zero control.
Exactly.
But I'll be honest, as a modern reader, this is where I get incredibly uncomfortable and I have to push back a bit.
Okay, let's hear it.
If God already proved his point 9 times, if he already shut down the Nile, the sky, the earth, the sun itself, why does this final 10th plague shift from a generalized national disaster to something so intimately devastating as the death of the firstborn children?
It's a huge shift.
The source material calls this justice, but to a 21st century listener, it sounds terrifying. It sounds merciless. How does the author of the paper actually justify this without just, waving it away?
It is a heavy, deeply unsettling question, and Velazquez addresses this directly in the text because you cannot ignore the gravity of Exodus chapter 12, verse 12. The author doesn't wave it away. He leans into the theological mechanics of it. You have to realize that the final plague brings the conflict to its absolute sharpest point. First, politically, it was a direct strike against Pharaoh himself.
Because Pharaoh thought he was a god.
Exactly. Pharaoh wasn't just a king. He was worshipped as a living god, the incarnate son of Ra. By decreeing the death of the firstborn, including Pharaoh's own heir, who was destined to inherit that divine rule, God is proving that he is the ultimate lord over life and death. The dynasty of the gods is broken.
Wow.
But more deeply, on a theological level, judgment is no longer just symbolic or environmental. It's no longer happening out in the fields or up in the sky. It becomes deeply personal, final, and unavoidable apart from divine provision.
It comes right into the home.
Right into the home. Velazquez argues that this demonstrates God's absolute claim on human life. It declares loudly that the Lord is not just one God among many who happens to have stronger magic. He's the author of life. And when a nation systematically builds an empire on the blood and oppression of his people, a final accounting is demanded. The moral debt of Egypt had come due.
Which means, crucially, the Israelites couldn't just sit back in the land of Goshen and watch this one happen from afar like they did with the darkness or the flies.
No, they were involved now.
Because the judgment of the 10th plague was universal. It applied to every household in the land. It necessitated a specific targeted solution. And this transitions us directly into the anatomy of the night that changed history.
Precisely. The mechanics of Exodus 12 are laid out in the sources with incredible precision, and everything about this night is absolutely saturated with meaning.
So let's break that down.
First, there is the selection of the lamb detailed in Exodus 12, verses 5 and 6. It couldn't be just any animal pulled from the flock at the last second. The instructions state it had to be a male, exactly a year old, and completely without blemish, no defects, no sickness, and they were to select it on the 10th day of the month, but they couldn't slaughter it until the 14th day at twilight.
Wait, why that 4-day gap? If they are in a hurry, why not just select it and sacrifice it on the same day?
Think about the psychology of that. You bring a pristine 1-year-old lamb into your home for 4 days.
Okay.
In a small, ancient household, That animal becomes part of the family space. The children would likely play with it. It becomes known, it becomes familiar.
Oh man, that makes it so much harder.
Exactly. So when the father of the house takes the knife at twilight on the 14th day, it isn't just an anonymous piece of livestock. It is a specific, known, innocent life being ended. It makes the concept of substitution incredibly visceral. It forces the family to feel the weight of what is happening.
And then there's what they do with the blood, Exodus 12, verses 7 and 13. They are instructed to take some of the blood and paint it on the 2 doorposts and the lintel of the houses where they eat the meal.
This is the decisive sign.
God explicitly says, when I see the blood, I will pass over you.
And finally, the meal itself, described verses 8 through 11, they are commanded to roast the lamb over a fire, not boil it, which would have been the common way to cook tough meat.
Right, but roast it.
Roast it, keeping the animal whole. They must eat it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. And they have to eat it in haste, with their cloaks tucked into their belts, their sandals on their feet, and their walking staff in their hand.
I have to stop here again because my mind immediately goes to the logistics of all this.
Sure.
Why not just tell them to hide quietly in the basement? If a divine destroyer is passing through the land, why all these incredibly specific culinary and architectural rules? I mean, eating a highly specific recipe of bitter herbs in a rush while painting doorways with blood.
What's fascinating here is how the sources describe this as embodied theology.
Embodied theology.
Yeah. We are used to modern Western learning, which is highly intellectualized. We read a book, we nod at a concept, and we say we believe it.
Right. It's all in our heads.
But ancient Near Eastern learning was entirely different. It was physical. You learn by doing, smelling, and tasting. This wasn't a ritual just for the sake of having a ritual. God was teaching them the complex, abstract logic of redemption through physical action.
Give me an example from the meal.
Take the bitter herbs, for example. The paper notes that they force a physical, sensory remembrance of the bitterness of their bondage in Egypt. You don't just think about slavery, you literally taste the suffering on your tongue while you eat the meal of freedom.
Wow, that's powerful.
And the unleavened bread.
It marks purity, but also extreme haste. There is literally no time to wait for yeast to rise. You are leaving your old life immediately. You don't even have time to let bread bake normally.
And the blood on the doorposts. Because I think modern people look at that and see a primitive superstition, like hanging garlic to ward off vampires or something.
That is exactly the misconception Velazquez corrects. The blood is the theological center of it all, but it isn't a magical shield or a mystical ward to scare off evil spirits.
Okay, so what is it? According to the text, it is a visible, legal testimony that death has already occurred in that house.
Oh, wow.
Judgment was due upon every house in Egypt, Israelite or Egyptian. Because, as the sources point out, the firstborn in the Israelite houses were spared not because they were morally innocent.
Right, they weren't perfect either.
They weren't saved because they were inherently better, kinder, or less sinful than the Egyptians next door. They were spared solely because God provided a sacrifice to stand in their place. The blood on the doorpost acts as a receipt. It declares to the judge the penalty of death demanded by justice has already been paid here.
So if the physical actions of that night in Egypt weren't just a one-off escape plan for a group of ancient slaves, they must forge a theological blueprint.
Absolutely.
And according to the analysis we have, they absolutely do. The source material outlines 7 key truths of the Passover that form the deep theological core of the entire biblical narrative. And we need to look at how these interlock because they build the framework for literally everything that follows.
Let's trace that logic. The very first truth the paper identifies is the concept that blood covers.
Okay.
Drawing from Leviticus 17:11, the text argues that blood is not just a biological fluid. In the biblical framework, the life of a creature is in the blood. Therefore, when blood is poured out, it signifies a life given. It becomes the ultimate sign of atonement and protection. It is life poured out to cover the guilty.
Which flows directly into the second truth, the mechanism of how that covering actually works. Substitution saves. This is the heartbeat of the paper.
Yeah, the innocent dies in place of the guilty.
The source points forward to Romans 6:23 in the New Testament. The wages of sin is death. In this framework, moral failure incurs a cosmic debt, and the currency to pay that debt is life.
Exactly.
Someone or something has to pay that wage. In Goshen, the unblemished lamb pays it.
But the provision of the lamb alone wasn't enough. Which brings us to the third, truth obedience matters.
Right, they had to actually do something.
This is a crucial distinction. The blood didn't save the Israelites just by sitting in a basin on the floor. It had to be actively applied to the doorposts in faith.
They had to follow through.
They had to actually trust God's bizarre word enough to walk outside, dip a branch of hyssop into the blood, and paint their own doors. Salvation was provided by God, but it had to be appropriated by human obedience.
And once appropriated, it could never be forgotten. Truth number 4 is that remembrance is a command. Exodus 12 insists this event must be a memorial forever.
It's an ordinance to teach future generations.
You don't just experience salvation and move on. You are commanded to build your entire calendar, your entire culture around remembering it.
Because that shared memory does something profound, which is truth number 5. Redemption creates a people.
Okay, unpack that.
This wasn't just a collection of random individuals who happened to escape a labor camp on the same night. This rescued group was forged in the fires that night into a covenant nation. Their identity wasn't based on their ethnicity or their geography. It was based entirely on their shared experience of being rescued by substitute blood.
And the paper is careful to note the origin of this plan. With truth number 6, God initiates.
Right.
The Israelites didn't hold a committee meeting and invent this plan. They didn't pitch the idea of a substitutionary lamb to the heavens. Salvation, the sources emphasize, always begins with God's mercy and God's provision.
He sees the bondage, he hears the groaning, and he engineers the escape.
Which brings us to the 7th and final truth, and arguably the most difficult one for modern minds to wrap themselves around. The truth that judgment and mercy go together.
This is huge.
Valesis goes into immense philosophical depth on this tension. We are told that God is both perfectly just and perfectly merciful simultaneously.
Yeah, and modern sensibilities are deeply uncomfortable with this. We want a deity of pure, uncomplicated love, entirely separate from any concept of divine anger or wrath.
We like mercy, but we hate judgment.
It's so true. But the text absolutely refuses to allow for that separation. The paper explicitly states something profound. Love without holiness becomes flaccid. Holiness without love becomes crushing. The Passover binds them together.
The judgment that night in Egypt was incredibly real. The Lord said, "I will strike." There was a lethal gravity in the air.
Exactly. The question the Passover text asks isn't whether God judges sin. The narrative assumes he absolutely does. The moral arc of the universe bends toward justice, and justice requires the punishment of oppression and rebellion.
Right.
The question the Passover asks is whether people will accept the shelter of the sacrifice he provides. The Passover presupposes divine wrath against evil, and then provides a meticulously designed way of escape through substitution. If you remove the reality of the judgment, the mercy of the deliverance means absolutely nothing.
Like it loses all its weight.
Completely. If there is no destroyer in the streets, the blood on the door is just vandalism.
Wow, that's a stark way to put it. You know, the analogy that often gets used here is a judge in a courtroom paying the fine for a criminal.
Yeah, you hear that one a lot.
But I actually think that falls a bit short because a fine doesn't capture the life or death gravity of the Passover. Instead, let's think about it like a catastrophic corporate collapse.
Okay, fine tracking.
Imagine a massive company where the executives have engaged in profound systemic fraud. The debt they have accrued is in the billions. It is unpayable, and the legal penalty for this level of fraud is decades in federal prison for everyone involved. The law is absolute.
Justice demands the company be liquidated and the employees jailed.
Exactly. But then the CEO, who is entirely innocent of the fraud, steps in. He doesn't just ask the government to ignore the law. That would make the justice system corrupt. Instead, he assumes total personal liability. He legally absorbs the entire entity's collapse into his own private accounts. He bankrupts himself, takes the prison sentence upon his own shoulders, and signs over a clean ledger to the guilty employees.
Wow.
Justice is entirely upheld. The debt was paid, the penalty was suffered. But mercy is entirely given to the employees. The two concepts perfectly overlap at the exact point of substitution. Right now, the visual backdrop behind you in that ancient Egyptian room should shift to an intricate, ancient set of scales, perfectly balanced.
That is an excellent way to conceptualize it.
Yeah.
It highlights the actual mechanism of the exchange. The scales of cosmic justice demand a specific weight, and divine mercy provides the exact weight needed in the form of the substitute. The ledger is cleared, but at immense cost.
So if this blueprint of substitution is so perfect, if it truly is the central logic of how God operates, we shouldn't just see it in one chapter of Exodus, right? We should see it echoed and expanded throughout the rest of the text.
And according to the historical and theological charts provided in our sources, we absolutely do. It isn't just a recurring theme. It is the central spine of the grand narrative of Scripture.
Let's walk through this monumental timeline the sources have laid out. It stretches from eternity past to eternity future, all connected by this one specific thread. And surprisingly, it starts before time itself?
Yes, the timeline begins in eternity. The sources point out that God's plan wasn't improvised. The Passover wasn't a desperate plan B because the plagues didn't work fast enough.
Right.
It reveals a purpose that existed before the foundation of the world. The paper cites Revelation 13:8, which speaks of the lamb slain from the foundation of the world.
That's incredible.
It implies that the earthly Passover in Egypt was merely a localized historical unveiling of a heavenly, eternal logic.
From eternity, the timeline moves to creation and the fall. Humanity was made for communion with the divine, but the introduction of sin brings exactly what we saw in Egypt: bondage, corruption, and death.
It fractures the relationship,
Yeah, and introduces the necessity of a substitute to bridge the gap.
which naturally leads to covenant and redemption. God promises the patriarch Abraham that he will build a people. And hundreds of years later, he delivers that people out of Egyptian slavery via the Passover lamb. He establishes a covenant nation through this very specific act of redemptive substitution.
But the story doesn't end in triumph there. After redemption comes the period of the kingdom and the exile. The Israelites are freed to live under God's rule, given the law at Mount Sinai.
But, as the historical narrative ruthlessly documents, human nature remains flawed.
Very flawed.
Their repeated disobedience brings judgment, societal collapse, and separation all over again. They effectively forget the logic of the lamb.
But then the prophets step in during the restoration period. They look at the broken state of Israel and they promise a new exodus, a final, definitive rescue.
The sources highlight the prophet Isaiah here, specifically Isaiah chapter 53, written hundreds of years before the New Testament.
Right.
Isaiah speaks of a righteous servant who will be pierced for our transgressions and crushed for our iniquities, the ultimate sin-bearing substitute, led like a lamb to the slaughter.
And that prophetic anticipation sets the stage for the arrival of the Messiah. Jesus arrives on the scene in the first century, and the way he is introduced is culturally explosive.
It really is.
John the Baptist doesn't point to this carpenter from Nazareth and say, "Behold the great moral teacher," or "Behold the new king." According to John 1:29, he points at him and uses an incredibly specific, culturally loaded title. "Behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world."
We have to pause and emphasize the sheer shock value of that statement to a first-century Jewish audience.
Oh, absolutely.
They had slaughtered millions of Passover lambs over the centuries. And here's a prophet pointing to a human being, claiming he is the ultimate fulfillment of that ancient Egyptian night. And the timing is entirely deliberate. Jesus is eventually crucified during the exact week of the Passover festival.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it changes everything about how we view modern religious practices, specifically the church and communion.
Yeah, today, when the global church gathers for the Lord's Supper, or the Eucharist, it operates entirely on the logic of the Lamb's blood.
Right.
Vallesis emphasizes that communion doesn't repeat the sacrifice of the cross, as if it wasn't sufficient the first time. Instead, it proclaims it. It internalizes the redemption.
Just like the Israelites had to physically eat the original Passover meal.
Exactly, that embodied theology we discussed earlier. Communion is the church actively remembering and feeding upon the provision of God. The bread and the cup matter because salvation is relational and covenantal. It is a meal shared with the rescuer, not just a distant legal transaction finalized in a courtroom.
And finally, the timeline reaches new creation and eternity. The grand narrative concludes in the book of Revelation. The Lamb reigns forever. There is no more death, no more curse, no more sea of chaos.
The source quotes Revelation 5:12, where the entire host of heaven is shouting, "Worthy is the Lamb who was slain."
It is mind-blowing when you see it laid out like this on the charts. For anyone listening, this completely shatters the deeply ingrained cultural misconception that the Old Testament is a story about an angry tribal god hurling lightning bolts, and the New Testament is a disconnected story about a loving, pacifist God.
Right. They aren't two different religions.
Our sources argue aggressively that it is one single, unbroken story, one unified plan, one lamb.
It is a stunning literary and theological achievement. But because this idea of a faith based on blood, judgment, and substitution, what some critics historically called a slaughterhouse religion, is incredibly heavy, human nature constantly tries to water it down.
We want to make it more comfortable.
We want to edit it to make it more palatable for polite society. Velocis dedicates an entire fascinating section of his paper to the modern dangers and misunderstandings of the Passover. He lists 5 critical traps that readers fall into.
Let's analyze these traps because I think anyone listening will recognize at least one of them and how they've viewed religion over the years.
Okay.
The paper argues that the first danger is moralizing the Passover. This is a very common trap in Sunday schools and popular theology. It's the temptation to make the Exodus story a moral fable about Israel being faithful or good, and therefore God looked down, saw their good behavior, and saved them.
Right, which completely inverts the text.
Yeah.
The truth is, it wasn't about their inherent faithfulness or their moral superiority to the Egyptians.
Yeah.
Ezekiel chapter 20 actually tells us the Israelites were actively worshiping Egyptian idols while in Egypt.
Wait, really?
Yes. They didn't survive the 10th plague because they were impressive people. They survived purely because they trusted the blood of the substitute. Moralizing the text turns a story of grace into a story of merit.
The second danger, Velasquez points out, is flattening the Passover into mere symbol. We like to say, oh, it's a beautiful metaphor for overcoming our personal struggles or breaking free from the Egypt of bad habits.
And while it certainly has symbolic resonance, the sources stress that if it is only a metaphor, it has no power to save. It was a real, historical, brutally physical act of deliverance. It was a literal night of life and death. If it didn't actually happen in history, the theological weight it carries for the rest of the Bible just collapses.
The third danger, which we touched on when discussing the plagues, is ignoring judgment.
This is perhaps the most prevalent modern trap. We want the rescue without the wrath. We love the idea of God delivering slaves, but we recoil at the idea of God striking the firstborn.
It's hard to stomach.
It is. But the paper argues brilliantly here. If you remove the reality of the plague, if God wasn't actually going to execute judgment on the land, then the blood on the doorpost is entirely meaningless. It becomes a solution to a problem that doesn't exist. You cannot have profound mercy without profound justice.
Danger number 4 is severing Passover from Christ. The paper argues this happens when people treat the Old Testament as an entirely separate alternative religion or an outdated set of primitive rules rather than the necessary foundational preparation for the gospel.
Without the ultimate fulfillment in Christ, the Passover is an incomplete story. It's an arrow pointing at nothing.
And the fifth danger is sentimentalizing the cross. This is the belief that the crucifixion of Jesus was just an expression of divine sympathy. God looking down at human suffering and saying, I feel your pain, let me suffer with you.
The Passover framework completely rejects that. It reminds us that the cross is not a sentimental gesture of solidarity. It is the brutal, necessary legal place where divine justice and divine mercy meet through substitutionary sacrifice. It was an active payment, not passive sympathy.
So what does this all mean? The question we have to ask ourselves as analysts of this text is, why do we do this? Why do we constantly, across centuries and cultures, try to soften the edges of this specific story?
I think we have to apply some critical psychological analysis here, and Velasquez hints at this. We do it because we want the freedom of the Exodus without facing the lethal gravity of our own condition.
That makes a lot of sense.
Acknowledging the absolute necessity of a bloody substitute means acknowledging that our moral condition was fatal to begin with. It means admitting we cannot save ourselves through education, politics, or philanthropy.
And human pride violently rebels against that.
Exactly. We want to be the heroes of our own rescue story. The Passover says unequivocally, you are not the hero. You are the one who needed to be rescued.
The paper argues that if you truly internalize this Passover logic, it drastically alters your daily psychology. It's not just abstract theology. Velasquez outlines 6 very clear practical implications for the listener. Let's unpack what those actually look like, maintaining that objective distance to see how the theory applies to practice.
Sounds good.
The first implication the paper draws is about taking sin seriously. The argument is that if it took the death of a spotless substitute to avert divine judgment, then moral failure sin is lethal, not trivial.
Yes. The author's point is that there can be no casualness in our lives where the text has revealed such gravity. If a debt requires the bankruptcy of the CEO to clear it, you don't casually rack up more debt on the company credit card the next day. You understand the immense cost of the clearance.
The second application Velasquez highlights is living with profound gratitude.
As the paper beautifully phrases it, a spared house is a grateful house. If you recognize that you are spared by mercy and not by merit, your entire posture toward other people changes.
It has to.
Your life should be marked by humility because you know you didn't survive the judgment by being inherently better than the person next to you. You survived because of the substitute. This kills arrogance.
Third, the text insists that for those involved in ministry or sharing this faith, they must preach the cross. The gospel, according to this Passover logic, isn't a self-help program.
Definitely not.
It's not about self-improvement dressed up in religious vocabulary. It is, at its absolute core, substitutionary redemption. The warning is stark here. If you lose the logic of the Passover, you lose the logic of the atonement entirely, and you are left with nothing but moral advice.
Fourth, there is a mandate to make disciples who remember. Just as the ancient Israelites were commanded to intentionally teach the meaning of the bitter herbs and the roasted lamb to their children, modern believers are tasked with passing this specific theological framework to the next generation. It cannot be lost to cultural assimilation.
Fifth, the paper draws out a fascinating point about finding hope in suffering. The argument here is that the blood on the doorpost proves that God can distinguish, protect, and save his people, even in the midst of widespread, devastating societal judgment.
It's an anchor of hope that mercy is real and active, even when the world around you feels chaotic and apocalyptic.
And the sixth practical implication is about worshiping in reverence. Valessis points out that worship, in this biblical framework, isn't about self-presentation. It's not about showing God how well you are doing or bringing him your impressive resume.
It is a sheltered approach. You only approach the holy God through the shelter of the blood of the Lamb. It demands a posture of deep awe.
But looking at these applications, I have to ask a question about how these play out in real time.
Okay, what are you thinking?
How does the author, or how do you, as a theologian, advise someone to balance the profound reverence and gravity of knowing that sin is absolutely lethal with the freedom and joy of knowing the substitute has already paid the price? It feels like those two emotional states, terrified awe and ecstatic joy, could constantly be at war in a person's mind.
It's a profound tension. But Valessis makes a compelling case that they are not at war. In fact, they elegantly resolve and fuel one another. Think about the psychology of rescue. You cannot experience profound, lasting joy without understanding the profound depth of what you were saved from. If you think you're only mildly flawed, if you think you just needed a little moral polishing, your gratitude for salvation will be incredibly mild. You'll say a polite thank you and move on.
That's true.
But if you recognize the lethal gravity of your situation, if you truly believe the destroyer was at your door and the debt was unpayable, the joy of the rescue becomes overwhelming. The gravity of the threat determines the magnitude of the joy.
Oh, I like that. The gravity determines the magnitude.
As the source powerfully concludes on this point, there is freedom, but not apart from a substitute. The joy is found in the substitute.
That brings our deep dive to its ultimate reality. According to these sources, for those sheltered by the substitute, the lamb has been slain, the blood has been shed, the judgment has been borne, and the people are truly, irrevocably free. The logic of redemption holds firm.
It does. It spans from a dusty slave hut in ancient Egypt, echoing through the prophets, actualized on a Roman cross, and resounding into the throne room of eternity. It is a masterclass in theological unity.
We want to leave you with one final thought to mull over, building purely on the sources' mention of Revelation and the end of time. The sources note that in the very end, in the cosmic consummation of all things in the book of Revelation, the ultimate ruler of the universe isn't depicted as a conquering lion.
Right.
He isn't depicted as a warrior with a bloody sword, or a political mastermind, or a billionaire CEO. When the curtain is pulled back on eternity, the supreme ruler is depicted as a slain lamb.
It's a striking image.
If the entire timeline of the universe culminates in the eternal worship of a sacrifice, what does that mean for our human obsession with power, dominance, and winning? We spend our lives trying to climb ladders, crush the competition, and assert our invulnerability. But according to this text, the ultimate victory in the history of existence was achieved through total sacrificial surrender. Just something to think about the next time you feel the desperate need to prove your own strength.
It is a profound, world-inverting paradigm shift to end on. True power in this narrative is found in substitutionary sacrifice.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. As you go about your week, remember the expectations we bring to our problems. We want our issues fixed cleanly with easy cause and effect. But true redemption, according to the Passover, isn't a clean intellectual fix. It's visceral, it's incredibly costly, and it always requires a substitute. Until next time.